and multiply it times 12 because it's lumpy. But if you did, that's $4.8 trillion deficit. I mean, we're clearly running a $2 trillion deficit, but I would say arguably it's even a bit larger than that. And there's always been a little bit of a disconnect between what they report as the deficit and the amount that the debt grows. They managed to sneak some stuff around and not run it through the P&L, the income statement, because the debt, if we run a $2 trillion deficit, the debt might grow $2.6 trillion. And I don't know where the other 0.6 came from, but the government's pretty good at kind of fiddling with the numbers. But yes, the point is that at a broad level, there is no discussion or thought in Washington, D.C. about how to address this problem. I thought it was extremely telling that, in the Kamala Trump debate, there was zero conversation about, the deficits and the debt and how it was going to be dealt with. And very similar last night in the Walz-Vance debate. So there was a little talk about inflation. There was no talk about the U.S. fiscal situation, which is really, kind of mirroring the situation that we've seen before in developing countries. I mean, this is not, there's no mystery.
It sort of moves afterwards, but it pumps even harder than gold does. Yeah. So I think that's what we've historically seen. So it's probably a fair guess to say that could happen again.
There's no doubt in my mind that's what's going to happen. I mean, I think when things break, gold's going to go through 3,000 and Bitcoin's going to go to 150, and easily in my view. Because they both represent sound money. I mean, one is old and analog and tired and widely distributed. The other is new and growing and therefore has a lot more upside because of, the low level of adoption. I mean, I'm always, Crisis Bitcoin on Twitter always has that. I'm always amazed at the chart where still the entire Bitcoin market is only $1 trillion in the context of $900 trillion of financial assets in the world. I mean, we're talking just a real sliver of the amount of money in the world is invested in the soundest asset in the world. And so, as time goes by, more and more people are going to come to realize that this is the soundest asset and they're going to adopt it. And it's, that disparity is going to close, right? I mean, Bitcoin's market cap is going to be much higher than it is right now.
So on the government debt, we can get to gold a bit later as well, but on the government debt, there's a lot of different views there, right? Some people are kind of like, oh, this is the debt spiral. It's going to it's going to get away from us. It's going to cause this big recession. And then maybe there's kind of the middle view, which is maybe
tax income comes from. And, the U.S. government's running fiscal deficits of about 6 or 7% of GDP. And in the 2000 crisis and the 2008 crisis, when those occurred, deficits went up by between 8 and 12%. So let's take the average of 10. Okay, we're running 6 already, and then we have a downturn. And so, tax receipts go down because the markets are down, and, social costs go up because we need more food stamps and, welfare. And so now we're running a 17% deficit. Well, that's real third world banana republic kind of stuff. And you're also starting to see in the dollar, the dollar is just about to break through 100, which is kind of a critical support level for a long number of years here. And so I think the release valve is going to be, lower dollar and higher inflation. The bond market, when they lose the bond market, that will be the big tell, and that will really light the fire underneath the hard money assets, gold and Bitcoin. And the reason that's the case is that if people start not buying the bonds and interest rates start going up, it makes the situation worse. As you know, that's the doom loop. There's another alternative, which is rather than pay it off, rather than have the collapse, rather than have the deflationary forces take over, that the inflation force just keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse until the underlying currency system involved just disintegrates. And von Mises said this first. I mean, it's either if you have a credit boom, you've either got to stop it at some point and suffer the pain, or you can continue it and then you go into a crack-up boom. And after the crack-up boom, the currency's worthless, because yes, I mean, we're all getting paid millions of dollars a year and stock market's at record highs and so on and so forth, but the currency's got no value. And, it's, gasoline is $20 a gallon and a hamburger costs $200 and so on and so forth. So that's one of the possible outcomes. I mean, I rate the hyperinflation, which I call super high inflation bordering on hyperinflation. I rate that as kind of a 10 or 20% possible outcome. I mean, I would have rated it lower 5 years ago, or 10 years, a lot lower 10 years ago, but it's increasing, because of the way these people are behaving. And it all depends on what the policymakers act, that the dollar is losing value, and they go to Costco and they pick up a gold bar, and they consider that to be savings, and rightly so and intelligently so. I mean, I'd like to orange pill them and have them do the same thing with Bitcoin, and ultimately probably they'll get there, but they're not there right now.
Yeah.
So that's the story there. To your earlier question about gold and Bitcoin and gold people getting Bitcoin, I go to these gold shows and I find it split about 50-50, Stefan. I mean, I think about half the gold people are like, oh yeah, totally get it. Not necessarily selling my gold, but I've got Bitcoin too. It's digital gold. It's the future. There's an adoption curve. I mean, they get it. And then the other half are the Peter Schiffs of the world, who are they're deep into their old trade, and they're frustrated that, something's come along to maybe steal some of the thunder, and they're afraid of the technology, and they see the Sam Bankman-Frieds and all the crypto nonsense, and they just kind of make a mentally heuristic decision. Well, oh, that shit's all fraud. I'm not touching it. I get that. When I encounter that, what I try and explain to them is that Bitcoin and crypto are two different things.
As you mentioned, JD Vance versus Waltz, and it looks, from last I checked, it looks like Trump, it's kind of like a coin flip at this point. So I'm curious your views on the election and what that would mean for Bitcoin, let's say, next year.
Yeah, that's a great question, and nobody has the answer. I mean, the problem is I don't think you can trust the polls. I mean, I have to say I thought Waltz did incredibly well, or Vance did incredibly well last night against Waltz. I think Waltz looked like a dunce and really fumbled the ball. I think that from what I can see, if this is a fair election, and that's a big if, we'll discuss it in a minute, Trump wins this. I think that, enough of the country is hurting badly enough, based on the economy, the inflation, the economic policies of the administration, that they're going to say, get me out of this. I want out. I want to go to the other side. But honestly, I can't tell how it's all going to shake out. I mean, the bull case for Kamala is there is and I know some of these people, there is I think that the abortion issue is a hot button for a certain portion of on both sides, and the fact there are women who are irrespective of where they are on the economy, they're going to vote that single issue, and they feel like there's a lot more women's choice and freedom and reproductive rights and so on and so forth. And you can call it whatever you want, but they feel much more comfortable in the Democratic Party. So I think if the Republican Party kind of got their act together on that particular issue and arrived at some decent compromise, the Democrats would be just completely dead. But that's the one issue that I think gives Kamala a little bit of strength. So, absent some total crisis, and the total crisis is that the dollar is plunging. Gold is going to 5,000, Bitcoin is going to 250,000. The bond market's in disarray. Interest rates are going up, and the Fed is being forced to monetize all the debt. I mean, that's a crisis, and if that happened, then maybe the people in Washington would face the music and say, you know what, we got to balance this shit, or else the currency is going to zero. I mean, that's kind of the extreme case, right? I mean, when Gresham's law really gets going. But I don't think that, we're not there yet. We're not even close to there yet. We're still in the, hey, this is no problem. We can spend whatever we want stage of things. Yeah.
It does. I mean, maybe it's an academic exercise, but
broken things with little band-aids, just means testing. So you're not going to get there. Sadly, we're going to run into a wall. There's going to be a fairly substantial crisis. And then everybody's going to have to sit down with a piece of paper and go, okay, we really blew this. The Keynesians were wrong. The sound money was the problem. Hyperinflation has wiped out everyone's wealth. Let's reboot and let's start with a new system. The money is going to be X, and people will trust it because it's defined by code and limited in supply. And slowly but surely, the economy will rebuild. And that's the thing. It's that process that I'm describing would be enormously painful. But the other side of that process, I mean, I've studied hyperinflation throughout the world for the last couple hundred years. If you don't kill people and you don't destroy the technology and you don't, if we don't go radio instrument of power to control all of us and to create wars and to kill people, and that's all evil stuff. And since we're not in a position to rein the state in on killing people, we are in a position to rein them in on money, because we don't have to use their money. We can use our own money. And we've now got a form of money that's totally fair, widely distributed. Everyone plays by the same rules, can't be messed with. That's a very, very powerful thing. Very powerful. And so, give it time, another 10 years, another 20 years at the most. It's gonna solve the problem, in my opinion. So we're going in the right direction, but I know it's frustrating. I mean, a lot of people would say, "Hey, we're stuck at 58,000." Well, yeah, we are. It's annoying. But I said, I was with Natalie and James yesterday, and I said, here's my prediction. I think by the end of this calendar year, we'll be over 100,000. Bitcoin's forming this nice declining flag. Top of the flag, it looks like you kind of break out at 66 from the flag. You break on Bitcoin is more transparent than gold. You can see the ledger, you can see what's where. And by the way, some of these guys, I was very impressed to see BlackRock actually talking about being willing to share the Coinbase addresses they have where their coins are. It's like, oh, this is good. So the other thing is that if you look at the gold market, the size of the gold market, the futures of the gold market, and the daily trading, it's multiples of the size of the underlying. And in the case of Bitcoin, that's not true. There are derivatives, there are futures, there are options, but the size of those are small relatively to the underlying. So I don't think they've had the time to develop the Bitcoin suppression schemes the way they, the gold suppression. I mean, they started suppressing the price of gold in the 60s. And so they've had a long time to perfect this. Bitcoin, the other thing is, I would say is, they've suppressed gold in a way. One of the ways they did it with the BIS, but they also did it out of the Cayman Islands and these third-party, anonymous accounts that I saw in 2013 that were trading enormous volumes of gold that only could have come from a sovereign. Is that, the sovereigns, recognizing that this is a matter of national security, would say to, they would take on a short position knowing that if they got run over, they could just print the money to fill the hole. But in gold, if they were going to get run over, they weren't likely to get run over with a 5x. In other words, gold, a big up year for gold would be 20 or 30%, right? Well, Bitcoin's a different animal. It's a different thing when, in 2020, 2019, 2020, it went from 10,000 to 50,000. That's 5x, very quickly. That's a bigger, if you're short it and you're trying to manipulate it, that's a really big hole to fill. So, I kind of tend to lean toward Bitcoin is not manipulated, but, in any big financial market where there are a lot of players, there will be those who will try, and there will be, I'm sure there is paper Bitcoin out there. There are futures contracts on Bitcoin. They don't have the underlying. So that's paper. And if that market were to grow, rapidly and aggressively, I would become more concerned. He said it's more a matter it is paper gold, but he said, the gold ounces are there. The problem is two people might have the same claim to claim to the same ounce. It's fractional reserve, right? That's what right. Fractional reserve is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we might see maybe more of a push for proof of reserves in Bitcoin land.
Absolutely.
And, that might help. But of course, not your keys, not your coins is, if you can, not your keys, not your coins, withdraw to your self-custody. But, I think we will see more people interested in doing that. And that in turn, in a way, we all have an incentive to encourage that because that's going to help pump the price even
Absolutely.
harder.
And let me just add one other thing that I think is important, because somebody asked me this the other day, and I think it's worth mentioning. And and I'm not out on the limb in terms of conspiracy stuff, and of course, a lot of conspiracy stuff is proven to be true. The Kennedy assassination, etc. But let me say this: the U.S. government approved the ETFs, right? It's convenient for the U.S. government that a lot of Bitcoin sits in ETFs in big, well-known financial institutions, right? Because if a president...
Kind of expecting a big drawdown like we've seen historically?
Yeah, I kind of have looked at the cycles and I've looked at the power law and I think on the next ramp, I think we're somewhere short of what I call the next thing I call the big print. Okay, so the next big print is going to come when something breaks, maybe the bond market, maybe the stock market, whatever it is, and the government realizes that they've got to, or else everything's going to collapse. That's coming. Outside date on that is 18 months. Inside date on that's tomorrow. Medium date on that, 6 months maybe, 6 to 9 months. I think when that occurs, Bitcoin will go and exceed the power law. We'll get a 2 standard deviation move above, and we'll pump to 300, 350. I think gold will probably run to, now I'm beginning to think 4,000 or 5,000. I mean, it's getting closer to 3, right? I used to say I'd run to 3. Now 3 is too low. I think silver will probably run to, 75 to 100. Okay. Following that, my suspicion is at some point, I think if, absent, intelligent and, by the way, at any point in time, all of this could be stopped by a monetary reset and responsible behavior out of Washington, D.C. But I think absent a crisis, I just don't see how that gets done. I don't think that happens. So I think, sadly, we're going to have to drive toward a crisis. And I think the crisis will be, as I've described, a few years out. And then at that point in time, people will be so frustrated, so angry, so hurt, so broke that a politician who stands up and says, hey, you know what? The problem really here is we don't have sound money, and we've got to go to a sound money standard. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's how it's going to be. And we're going to reset and start over. That person will win overwhelmingly. I know some think the U.S. will break up and this, that, and the other. I think no, there's much more likely to be just kind of a constitutional convention that kind of tries to reset the rules, and hopefully the people involved in that will do a good job. But as Saylor says, and rightly so, AI is going to drive the demand for nuclear power because AI requires enormous amounts of electricity. So they're contrasting things going on in the world. There are a lot of good things and there's some very bad things. But government not having the printing press, I think, will lead to, a much lower strife world. As we talk here, we're talking at a period of time where we've got a couple of wars going on and they're very ugly and a lot of people are suffering, and that's just all, it's all tragic. And to me, that's all occurred because these centralized governments, can pay for these things. And if we had a more decentralized system, nobody would vote to go kill other people. So, so a better world is coming.